At a lavish wedding inside his private mansion, the millionaire marries a fake bride, but her secret vow changes everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of a quiet upscale cafe in Manhattan. The polished marble tables reflected the amber glow of the hanging lamps, each detail whispering wealth and exclusivity. Yet in the corner booth, something unusual was unfolding. Alexander Reid, the 34-year-old CEO of Reid Global, sat in his tailored charcoal suit, a contract folder placed neatly between the porcelain cups. Across from him sat Lila Torres, her second-hand coat still damp, her hands clutching the strap of a worn leather bag as though it was her last shield. "Marry me," Alexander said flatly, as if it was the most ordinary business proposal in the world. He pushed the contract toward her, the weight of the pen placed carefully on top. Lila froze. Her laugh came out sharp, almost disbelieving. "Excuse me? I do not even know you. And you want me to marry you?" The sound of her voice clashed with the hush of the cafe. A few heads turned. The absurdity of it was scandalous, almost offensive. A billionaire asking a stranger, a struggling piano teacher, to marry him like he was hiring a secretary. Alexander leaned back, expression unreadable. "Not marriage in the way you are thinking. Think of it as a contract. 6 months. Appearances only. In return, every debt of yours will be cleared. Your mother's hospital bills. The rent you are about to lose. Everything." Her breath caught. How could he possibly know? The papers in her bag trembled. The overdue notices she had stuffed in there like dirty secrets, suddenly bared under his calm gaze. "That is insane," Lila whispered, gripping the strap tighter. "People do not just marry strangers for money." Alexander's eyes narrowed, cool as steel. "You are right. But people do marry for power. And I need this. The board will strip me of my position if I remain unmarried. You need money. I need a bride. It is simple." His voice was steady, detached, like this was no different than negotiating a merger. He slid the ring box across the table. The lid snapped open to reveal not a diamond, but a plain gold band. Stark. Empty. Almost insulting in its simplicity. Lila blinked at it, heat rising to her face. "That is your idea of a proposal?" "It is not a proposal," Alexander replied smoothly. "It is an agreement. You sign the contract. You wear the ring. You stand by my side in public. In 6 months, you walk away with more than enough to build a new life. No one needs to know." The gold band gleamed under the cafe lights, but instead of sparkling like a symbol of love, it looked cold, almost like a shackle waiting to close around her finger. The absurdity of it was enough to spark outrage. How many people would condemn her if she agreed? How many would say she sold herself? And yet, how many of those same people had ever stared down the possibility of losing everything in a single night? Lila's chest tightened. She thought of her mother, lying pale and weak in a hospital bed. She thought of the landlord pounding on their door, the eviction notice in bold red letters. She thought of the way her younger students had begged her not to stop teaching piano because they loved the music she brought into their lives. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why me? You could pay anyone. Hire an actress, a model, someone who belongs in your world." For the first time, Alexander's eyes flickered with something almost human. "Because you are desperate enough to say yes, and desperate people do not betray contracts." Oh, the blunt cruelty of the statement hit harder than the rain outside. Lila's cheeks burned with anger, with shame, with the terrifying awareness that he was not wrong. She stared at the contract on the table, the black ink spelling out the rules of a life she never imagined living. 6 months. No intimacy. Appearances only. Silence was required. Above all else, the clause written in bold, "Love must not be spoken." Her fingers brushed the edge of the pen. The cafe hummed quietly around her, but to her it was deafening, as though every sound carried the weight of the choice before her. And then, with a trembling hand, she picked up the pen. She did not sign. Not yet. But the ink hovered dangerously close to the page. What she did not know, what no one in that cafe could have guessed, was that this one reckless choice would ignite a scandal that would make the city whisper her name for months. Some would call her a gold digger. Others would call her a fool. But none of them would ever know about the secret vow she would make in the shadows of their fake marriage. The vow that would change everything. Lila did not sleep that night. The rain followed her home, tapping against the cracked window of her tiny apartment, a rhythm that only reminded her of the pen that had hovered over that contract. She sat hunched over the kitchen table, bills spread across the wood like a battlefield of numbers. Red stamps screamed overdue. The envelope from the hospital lay at the center, heavier than stone, her mother's name printed at the top. Her phone buzzed once. A message from the landlord. Rent was due 3 days ago. If you cannot pay by the end of the week, you and your mother will have to leave. Lila closed her eyes, her chest tightening. She rose quietly and crossed the narrow hall to her mother's room. The old oxygen machine hummed softly, filling the silence. Her mother, pale against the thin pillow, stirred slightly but did not wake. Lila brushed a stray strand of hair from her mother's forehead and whispered, "I will fix this. Somehow." But how? The images of Alexander Reid's cold expression replayed in her mind. His words echoed, "You are desperate enough to say yes, and desperate people do not betray contracts." She wanted to hate him. She wanted to slam that contract back into his face. But when she looked at the bills, at her mother's fragile frame, she could not deny the truth. He was cruel, but he was not wrong. By morning, Lila dragged herself out of bed, pulling on the same faded coat she wore to her part-time piano lessons. The walk through the damp city streets was long. Her shoes soaked quickly, the soles worn thin. She kept her head down as she entered the community center where she taught. Inside, a small, upright piano stood in the corner. The keys chipped, the wood scratched. But to her, it was sacred. The children gathered, eyes bright, voices loud. "Miss Torres! Play the song again!" She forced a smile. "All right, once more." Her fingers moved across the keys, the melody filling the small room. For a few minutes, she forgot about contracts and hospital bills. For a few minutes, she was only a teacher, giving music to children who needed joy more than anyone. But when the lesson ended, one little girl slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. Lila unfolded it later and saw a crude drawing of a piano with the words in shaky handwriting. "Please do not stop teaching." Her throat tightened. She shoved the paper into her bag and left quickly, afraid her tears would betray her. That evening, she returned to the apartment to find the landlord waiting outside her door. His arms were crossed, his face stern. "Lila, I am sorry, but I cannot keep waiting. I have someone else ready to take this unit. Please," she begged. "Just a few more days. My mother, she cannot be moved right now." The man's eyes softened slightly, but he shook his head. "Business is business. By Friday, you must be out." She closed the door, her hands trembling, her breath uneven, the weight of the world pressed down on her. And once again, the memory of that plain gold band on the cafe table returned. The contract she almost signed. The contract that could solve all of this. Meanwhile, across town, Alexander Reid sat in the back of his black sedan as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. His phone buzzed with messages from Veronica, his cousin, already circling like a shark. "The board is restless. They want to see you settled. You cannot delay much longer." He closed the phone with a sharp click and stared out at the rain. He thought of Lila Torres. The fire in her eyes when she called him insane. The way her hand had trembled when she touched the pen. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Every woman in his world came polished, rehearsed, trained to play the game of wealth. But she was raw, desperate, honest. And that honesty, however messy, might be exactly what he needed. Back in her apartment, Lila sat beside her mother, clutching the little girl's drawing in one hand and the hospital bill in the other. Her tears slid silently down her cheeks. She whispered to the empty room, "If this is the only way, maybe I do not have a choice." And in that moment, as the storm raged outside, The paths of Alexander Reid and Lila Torres began to lock into place. Two lives caught in a contract neither fully believed in, yet both too desperate to escape. What neither of them could know was that this agreement, born out of necessity, would soon ignite something far more dangerous than debt or inheritance. It would ignite emotions neither of them had planned for, emotions forbidden by the very words written in bold across that contract. Love must not be spoken. Lila stood at the window of her apartment, watching the rain blur the city skyline. The sleepless night had drained her, but by morning she had reached a decision. The bills would not vanish. The landlord would not wait. Her mother's health would not pause. The world had already cornered her, and Alexander Reid's contract had become the only way forward. By late afternoon, she found herself once again in that cafe, the same place where the unusual proposition had first been spoken. The table looked the same. The ring box sat where it had before, but now the pen rested open across the papers as though waiting for her return. Alexander entered without ceremony, his coat draped perfectly across his shoulders, his polished shoes tapping against the floor. He sat opposite her and spoke in that same steady voice. "Have you made a decision?" Her throat tightened. "I will do it." He gave no sign of triumph, only lifted the contract and slid it closer to her. "Then we begin with the rules." Lila picked up the document. The words stared back at her, each clause clear and binding. Alexander read them aloud, as if to seal them into her memory. Rule 1. This is not a marriage of love. You are not to expect affection, romance, or intimacy. Rule 2. You will accompany me to a minimum of 5 public events. At these events, you will present yourself as my lawful wife. Rule 3. Neither of us will interfere in the other's personal life outside this arrangement. Rule 4. Silence. No mention of this contract to anyone, including your family. Rule 5. Written in bold at the bottom. The word love must never be spoken between us. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the pen. Each word felt heavier than the last, like invisible chains locking around her. But she signed. Her signature looked small beside his bold one. But it was there, black ink against white paper. Alexander slid the ring box forward. The plain gold band gleamed under the cafe light, sharp and cold. He did not kneel. He did not smile. "Wear it." Her fingers shook as she slipped the ring onto her hand. It was loose, a size too big, as though mocking her. Not a perfect fit, not meant for forever, only meant for the months ahead. The contract was signed, the band was on her hand, and in that instant, Lila Torres ceased to be only a struggling piano teacher. She was now the wife of Alexander Reid, though only on paper. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her. "From this moment on, you belong to my world. Do not falter when they test you. Do not break character when they doubt you. Fail, and we both lose everything." Lila swallowed hard. "And if I succeed?" For the first time, a shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Then you walk away free, richer than you ever imagined. No debts, no burdens, a clean slate." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that 6 months could be survived, endured, and forgotten. Yet deep down, something told her this contract was not as simple as he made it sound. As they rose from the table, the rain outside had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and shining under the streetlights. Alexander placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her toward the waiting black sedan. Cameras might not be there yet, but soon they would be. The world would see her not as a teacher, not as a struggling daughter, but as the wife of a powerful man. Inside the car, silence pressed heavy between them. She turned the gold band around her finger, unable to shake the feeling that it was not a ring but a key that had just locked her into a cage built of wealth, secrecy, and rules. Her story had shifted. The door to her old life had closed, and the next chapter would not be one she could easily escape. The contract was signed, the ring was on her finger, and within days the transformation began. Alexander Reid wasted no time. If Lila Torres was going to stand by his side as his wife, even a temporary one, she had to look the part. The first step was clothing. The stylist arrived at his mansion with racks of gowns, shoes, and accessories worth more than Lila's entire apartment. Satin, silk, velvet colors, and fabrics spilled across the room like a dream and a nightmare combined. Lila stood awkwardly in front of the mirror, tugging at the straps of an evening gown as the stylist circled her. "Lift your chin," the woman instructed. "Grace comes from posture." Lila tried. She really did. But the moment she took 2 steps in the towering heels, her ankle wobbled and she stumbled forward. She caught herself against a chair, cheeks burning. "I am not sure these are designed for walking," she muttered. From the doorway, Alexander's cool voice answered, "You will not be walking. You will be gliding." Her eyes flashed at him through the mirror. Easy for him to say. The second step was etiquette. A private tutor with silver hair and impeccable manners sat across from her at a long dining table. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, forks and knives lined up in perfect formation. Lila stared at the cutlery as though it were an alien code. "Always start from the outside and work inward," the tutor said kindly. She picked up the wrong fork anyway. Alexander, seated beside her, reached over without a word. His fingers brushed hers as he shifted the utensil to the correct place. The touch was brief, almost clinical, but it sent a spark up her arm. She glanced at him, but his face remained unreadable. The third step was the ballroom. The grand hall of his mansion, polished floors shining beneath golden light, became their practice ground. The instructor played a waltz, and Alexander extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. "Follow me," he said. The first turn was a disaster. She stepped too soon, her heel caught, and she stumbled straight into him. He steadied her with a firm grip, his jaw tight. "Try again." They moved across the floor, her focus locked on his shoes, trying desperately not to misstep. But inevitably, her heel came down hard on his polished leather. He flinched. "That is the third time. I warned you," she said, half frustrated, half embarrassed. For a moment, his stern mask cracked. The corner of his mouth lifted in something close to a laugh. "You are hopeless." She blinked at him. It was the first time she had seen even a hint of humor in his face. For a moment, he looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man caught off guard. They tried again and again, until the music carried them around the hall without another stumble. Lila's chest rose and fell with effort, but her smile was real. For the first time since this strange agreement began, she felt the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this world. The montage of her days blurred together. Dresses, etiquette, dance, repetition. Each mistake was met with correction, each failure with another attempt. She hated the endless drills, the pressure, the constant weight of expectation. But through the frustration, something unexpected began to form. Alexander, who had seemed made of stone, started to soften in the smallest ways. A half smile here, a fleeting look of approval there. And each time she stumbled, he caught her not just physically, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who would not let her fall in front of others. Late one evening, after yet another round of lessons, she sank into a chair, kicking off the painful shoes. "Your world is exhausting," she muttered. Alexander paused in the doorway, studying her. "And yet you are still standing." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the contract between them felt less like a cage and more like a bridge. She looked away quickly, reminding herself of the rules. No romance, no love, just a deal. But deep inside, she could not deny the truth. Every gown she wore, every lesson she endured, every waltz they danced, it all tied her closer to him in ways no contract could control. And whether she wanted it or not, the world of Alexander Reid was slowly becoming her own. The weeks of preparation led to the night of the first true test. The gala was held in a glass-domed ballroom, chandeliers scattering light like diamonds across polished marble floors. The city's elite arrived in black cars, stepping out in gowns and tuxedos, greeted by the relentless flashes of cameras. Alexander Reid moved through the crowd with the same ease he carried in boardrooms. Calm, sharp, untouchable. At his side walked Lila Torres, her hand looped lightly through his arm. The gown chosen for her shimmered silver beneath the lights. But even as her appearance matched the setting, her heart pounded with dread. The cameras snapped furiously. Reid's bride arrives. "Who is she? She looks so different from the usual socialites." The voices blended together, and Lila held her chin high, reminding herself of every lesson drilled into her over the past days. Inside, champagne glasses clinked, and conversation buzzed like static. The room was filled with business titans, politicians, celebrities. Lila could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some looked curious. Others looked skeptical. Veronica Reid approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Dressed in deep red satin, she exuded sharpness. Each word she spoke a hidden blade. "Alexander," she greeted smoothly, kissing his cheek before turning her gaze on Lila. "And this must be your wife. What a surprise. Tell me, Lila, how do you find yourself adjusting to our world?" Lila forced a polite smile. "It is different, but I am learning." Veronica's smile widened, the trap already set. "Splendid. Then perhaps you can answer a simple question for me. What are your thoughts on the current volatility of the stock market? Do you believe the Federal Reserve's recent policies will stabilize things or make matters worse?" The surrounding group of investors and journalists leaned in. Glasses paused midair. The question hung heavy in the air, sharp and deliberate. Lila's breath caught. The words blurred together. Stock market, volatility, policies. None of it belonged to her world. She opened her mouth, panic tightening her chest. She could walk straight into humiliation, a single wrong answer exposing her ignorance. Alexander's gaze from across the room was steady, unreadable, as if testing whether she could hold her own. Her hands trembled at her side. She could feel Veronica waiting for her to stumble, the cameras ready to record the fall. But then, something inside Lila shifted. She thought of the children at the community center. She thought of the piano keys, the way they looked intimidating, until she learned to see them as notes that told a story. She drew in a breath and smiled lightly. "Well," she began slowly, "I admit that I am not a financial expert, but I do know music. When a piano goes out of tune, you can press the keys as hard as you want, but the sound will still be wrong. You need to adjust carefully, sometimes string by string, until harmony is restored. Perhaps the market is the same. No matter how loud or forceful the notes, what matters is whether balance can be found again." There was silence. And then, laughter. Warm, genuine laughter. One of the older investors clapped his hands. "That is actually not a bad way to put it." Another added, "Sensible. Refreshing to hear someone speak plainly instead of throwing jargon around." The tension broke. The group nodded, some raising their glasses toward her in approval. Cameras flashed, catching her soft smile, her unpretentious words. Veronica's expression flickered, her smile tight, eyes narrowing for only a second before she masked it again. "How poetic," she said coolly, before stepping back. Within hours, the headlines would capture the moment. Reid's bride charms gala with music metaphor. Simple, sincere, and unafraid. A refreshing voice among the elite. From across the room, Alexander's eyes locked on her. For the first time since their agreement began, his expression softened. Not amusement, not calculation, something else. A faint spark of pride, quickly hidden, but undeniable. Lila exhaled slowly, her heart still racing. She had survived the test. She had not played their game. She had played her own. And for the first time, standing beneath the glow of chandeliers and surrounded by power, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could belong. But as she glanced once more at Alexander, she realized the true danger was not Veronica's schemes or the public's suspicion. The real danger was the way her chest tightened under his gaze, the way pride in his eyes made something forbidden stir inside her. The contract had warned her. Love must not be spoken. But what if it was already beginning, quietly, in silence? The gala ended with applause and flashbulbs, but the night was not finished. Hours later, the mansion stood silent under the pale glow of the moon. The guests were gone, the laughter replaced by a hush that echoed in every marble hall. Lila stepped onto the wide balcony, her heels clicking against the stone before she slipped them off, and let the cool surface touch her bare feet. The city stretched far below, lights flickering like constellations trapped on Earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to slow the racing thoughts in her head. Behind her, the door opened with a quiet sound. Alexander Reid stepped out, jacket undone, bow tie loosened. The sharp lines of his perfection softened for once. He did not speak at first. He simply stood beside her, looking out over the skyline as if it belonged to him. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said finally. His tone was calm, but something warmer lingered beneath it. Lila let out a small laugh. I almost ruined everything. If they had pressed harder, I would have been exposed. You did not ruin anything. You turned a trap into a victory. He glanced at her, his eyes catching the glow of the city lights. Few people can do that. She shook her head, her voice quieter. I am not one of your executives, Alexander. I am not trained for this. I am just trying to survive. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then he spoke, softer than she had ever heard him. Do you know why I despise these galas? Because they remind me of my father. He dragged me to them when I was a boy, always telling me to smile, to shake hands, to stand taller. And still, it was never enough. After my mother died, he reminded me daily that I was weak without her, that I had to become harder, colder, untouchable. Lila turned, startled by the honesty in his voice. The mask of the ruthless CEO slipped, revealing something raw. So, that is why you built this wall around yourself, she whispered. His jaw tightened. Walls keep people from leaving. They keep disappointment out. Her chest ached at the weight of those words. Slowly, almost without thinking, she reached out. Her hand brushed against his where it rested on the balcony rail. The touch was light, tentative, but it was enough. Alexander looked down at their hands. He did not pull away. For a long heartbeat, the man who had spoken of contracts and rules said nothing at all. You are not weak, Lila said gently. You are human, and humans are meant to be loved whether you admit it or not. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, yet not as cold as before. The city lights reflected in them, turning steel into something almost vulnerable. The moment stretched, fragile, delicate, filled with the unspoken. No kiss, no embrace. Just two people standing in the quiet night, their hands touching lightly, both aware that the boundaries of their contract were beginning to blur. And as the silence deepened, Lila realized with a quiet fear that what had started as survival was slipping into something else entirely, something the contract had forbidden, but her heart was no longer able to deny. The fragile quiet of that night did not last long. Just days after the gala, the city awoke to headlines that splashed across every paper and flooded every gossip site. Alexander Reid's marriage exposed as a sham. Who is Lila Torres? Bride or paid actress? Anonymous source claims contract hides the truth behind the Reid union. Lila sat frozen in the mansion's breakfast room, the glossy pages spread across the table. Her hands trembled as she read the words again and again, the accusations sharper than any knife. They quoted unnamed insiders. They questioned her background. They mocked her plain roots. The same photographs that once praised her as genuine now ridiculed her as nothing but a gold digger. The sound of heels echoed down the hall before Veronica Reid entered, her expression cool, her voice smooth with false sympathy. I told Alexander this would happen. The world was never going to accept someone like you. Now look, his reputation is collapsing. The board is furious, and all because you thought you could play wife in a world that will never belong to you. Lila's lips parted, but no words came. She felt the walls of the mansion pressing closer, her chest tightening with shame. Alexander arrived moments later, the fury in his eyes enough to silence even Veronica. He tossed the paper aside. This is nothing but noise. Do not let it get to you. Noise? Lila's voice cracked. They are calling me a fraud. They are saying I married you for money. And the worst part is, they are not entirely wrong. His jaw hardened. We knew this could happen. You agreed to this. You signed for it. Her breath came shallow, each word harder than the last. I signed to save my mother. I signed because I had no choice. But I did not sign up to be humiliated in front of the entire city. Veronica's smile curved like a blade. The board meets tomorrow, Alexander. They want answers. If these accusations prove true, you know what it means. They will strip you of the company, and perhaps rightfully so. Alexander ignored her, but Lila saw the tension in his shoulders, the storm behind his controlled face. For all his power, even he could not silence the rumors that now burned like wildfire. That evening, when the mansion finally grew quiet, Lila packed a small bag. The plain gold ring weighed heavy on her finger. She slipped it off and placed it gently on the desk in his office. When Alexander found it later, his breath caught. The band lay in the center of the polished wood, stark and empty, a symbol of everything unraveling. Lila walked out of the mansion with nothing but her coat and her tears. The city lights that once dazzled her now blurred into shadows. She had thought she could endure 6 months of pretending. She had thought she could survive the weight of the contract. But she had not prepared for the cruelty of a world that saw her as less than human. And as the door closed behind her, Alexander Reid stood alone in his empire, staring at the empty space where she had been. For the first time, the man who had built walls so high felt the crushing weight of losing someone he never admitted he needed. The next morning, the Reid board of directors gathered in a conference hall that shimmered with cold steel and glass. The atmosphere was sharp, every glance filled with judgment. The scandal had spread too widely to ignore. Veronica Reid sat near the head of the table, her smile thin and victorious, waiting for Alexander to stumble. When Alexander entered, silence swept through the room. He wore no mask of arrogance this time, no polished indifference. He carried only the weight of truth. One of the senior board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Reid, the press claims your marriage is a fabrication, that your wife is not truly your partner, but a contract bride. If this is true, you have not only deceived us, but you have jeopardized the reputation of Reid Global." All eyes fixed on him. Cameras from the press captured the moment, broadcasting it live beyond the walls of that room. Alexander's gaze swept over the board, steady, unshaken. "It is true. This marriage began as a contract. I will not deny it." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Veronica leaned forward, her voice dripping with triumph. "You see? He admits it. He has lied to all of us." But Alexander did not falter. "Yes, it began with a contract. But what none of you understand is that what started on paper became something real. Lila Torres is not a fraud. She is not a gold digger. She is the only person in my life who dared to speak to me without fear, without calculation. And that honesty, that courage, is worth more than all of your stock shares combined." R1. The board members shifted, unsettled by the conviction in his voice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet. "At our wedding, Lila made a vow that none of you heard. She whispered it quietly, not for cameras, not for appearances, but for herself. Her vow was this: 'I vow to never sell my dignity for wealth, only for love.' Tell me, does that sound like a woman who married me for money?" The words fell heavy in the room, striking deeper than any denial could. For a moment, there was only silence. Even Veronica's smirk faltered. Alexander continued, his voice steady. "If the price of this truth is my position, then take it. Strip me of the company. But I will not stand here and allow you to drag her through the mud. She is my wife. Contract or not, she is mine, and I choose her." The elder board member, who had watched silently, finally spoke. His voice was slow but firm. "Sometimes leadership is not about profit margins or polished facades. It is about conviction. Today, Alexander Reid has shown us that. I vote he remains." Murmurs filled the room as others followed. Hands raised one after another, a majority in his favor. The tide had turned. Veronica's face hardened as she realized her plan had slipped through her fingers. When the session ended, Alexander did not celebrate. He left the building and stepped into the waiting car, his mind fixed on one thought only: Lila. He had defended her in front of the world, but unless he could reach her now, unless he could show her that his words were more than a performance, the victory would mean nothing. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reid knew that saving his empire was not enough. He had to save the woman who had unknowingly become the center of it. The boardroom battle was over, but Alexander Reid did not return to his office or his mansion. Instead, he drove straight into the city, searching for the woman who had walked away with his heart. Hours passed before he found himself outside a modest apartment building in Queens. The lights from the upper floor glowed faintly against the night, and something told him she was there. He climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When Lila opened the door, surprise widened her eyes. She stood in the doorway with a blanket around her shoulders, exhaustion written across her face. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "I told them the truth," he said softly. "I told the board about the contract, but I also told them about you, about your vow." Her lips parted, her breath catching. "You, what did you say?" "That you promised never to sell your dignity for wealth, only for love. That you never pretended with me. That you are the only person who has ever seen me as more than my name." His voice faltered slightly, uncharacteristically raw. They wanted me to choose between the company and you, and I chose you. No. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. Why would you risk everything for me? You had no reason to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This time, the ring inside was not a plain band, but a diamond that caught the light and shimmered with quiet brilliance. He sank to one knee on the worn wooden floor. The same man who once spoke only in contracts, now speaking in vows. No terms, no signatures, no deadlines, just us. Marry me again, Lila. Not as an agreement, not for appearances, for real. Her tears spilled freely as her hand flew to her mouth. The words she had long buried pressed to the surface, trembling on her lips. Alexander! He took her hand gently. I cannot promise perfection, but I can promise truth. I can promise that I will not let you stand alone again. For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then Lila nodded, her voice breaking. Yes. This time, yes. Oh. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, no longer a symbol of chains but of freedom. He rose and pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since their fateful meeting in that cafe, the walls around him crumbled completely. Weeks later, the ceremony was small, held not in a glittering ballroom but in a quiet garden bathed in sunlight. No press, no contracts, only the people who mattered. Lila's mother sat in a wheelchair near the front, her eyes bright with joy. As the vows were spoken, Alexander whispered, "Fake marriage gave me everything real." Lila smiled through her tears, her fingers tightening around his. And in that moment, under the open sky, they both knew the truth. What had begun as a deal had become the one thing. Neither of them thought they would ever find love without conditions.